Humans have changed the chemistry of the atmosphere, and in particular they've changed the quantity of heat-trapping gases by increasing them through burning fossil fuels.
We already know, and have done really for about 100 years, broadly, that carbon dioxide increases the greenhouse effect, and that's going to have knock-on impacts. So it's interesting how the estimates of the impact of climate change have not really changed massively over that period. It's just the models get more refined.
We're able to demonstrate that the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere has increased by 40% since pre-industrial times, mostly as a result of human activities, and that the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are higher than they've been for the last 800,000 years in Earth history.
Well, a few years ago, I thought that climate change was primarily an environmental issue. It was only after that that I realized it was a very important health issue as well.
It's really important to understand how climate change affects health and what health professionals can do about it.
The World Health Organization has found that already 150,000 people are dying because of climate change. Between 2030 and 2050, the World Health Organization expects climate change to cause approximately 250,000 deaths per year from heat stress in the elderly, malaria, diarrhea, and childhood undernutrition.
It's not mostly about the deaths. Climate change will change everything. In 2009, a group of Australian medical students got very interested in this issue, and they put together a video trying to summarize what the health effects of climate change were.
Well, we expect to see direct effects of climate change on health. We're already starting to see those. So we're starting to see more severe heat waves, more extreme precipitation events, more droughts and floods. And those are things that we pretty much understand. Our major concern is that this will undermine the environmental determinants of health, the things that all human societies ultimately rely on.
It's been documented that the Earth may have already warmed by almost 1 degree since pre-industrial times. And this may not sound like much, but this is quite important. As we can see, when we have a fever, a 1 degree rise can make us quite uncomfortable. Of course, the 1 degree rise is just the global average. There are some areas that are already experiencing much higher temperatures than that.
Globally, the number of weather natural disasters has more than tripled since the 1960s. And every year, these disasters result in over 60,000 deaths. As the Earth warms, air holds more moisture. And that increased vapor in the atmosphere, combined with low pressure, can result in more severe storms. Floods are also increasing in frequency and intensity. And that will continue through the coming century. Flooding contaminates freshwater supplies. It can heighten the risk of waterborne diseases, and it can create breeding grounds for disease-carrying insects, such as mosquitoes.
बजे से और 2 बजे रात तक जो है मूसलाधार बारिश हुई साहब। पानी इतना ज़्यादा था कि बाहर निकलना मुश्किल था।
ये जून के बाद जो भारी तबाही जो उत्तराखंड में हुई उसके बाद लगातार तो हर दिन बारिश होती है और हर जगह कहीं न कहीं बादल फटे हैं।
बहुत अन्याय हुई।
उसी में बसे थे और रात के 1 बजे एक लेडीज ने आगे सारे पल्लों को खटखटाए और जब पल्ला खटखटाए तो नींद खुली। भागो 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 भागो। उसके बाद में हम लोग भागे और कूद पड़े और सारे पैसे कौड़ी सब हम लोग पे निर्वस्ता है ये कि खत्म हो गया।
गाँव सबको बगी कड़िया 2-4 रहे हम हार या खाया कोटदार में
पूर्व गाँव आयो
कोई ना हम तुम क्या
Extreme air temperatures can lead to a range of health effects, which can range from heat exhaustion to heat stroke, and it primarily causes death due to cardiovascular compromise.
The 2003 heat wave in Western Europe caused 70,000 deaths, in excess of what would normally have been expected in August.
And this was mainly in the elderly. The elderly are the most vulnerable group.
Now, that was a temperature of a couple of degrees above average in some of the richest countries in the world, with fully functioning national health systems.
In a period of 6 weeks from late July to the end of August, over 15,000 people were killed in France by heat exhaustion, dehydration, and heat stroke. Most of the dead were elderly, left to perish in a city deserted for the annual August holiday. On one day alone, a day that's now known as Black Monday, 3,000 Parisians died.
The famous Black Monday, when around 3,000 people died in Paris in one night. Never during the Second World War did so many people die in one night in Paris, even during the bombings. We were dealing with things on such a scale. Paris had never had that many victims in one go.
Dr. Patrick Perlou was on the front line of the crisis. His hospital was overwhelmed as more and more of the dead and dying arrived. The morgues were soon full. There were so many bodies, a refrigerated warehouse at the edge of the city had to be used as a temporary morgue.
What you see over there are the zinc roofs of Paris. People were baking in there. The police were opening doors only to find corpses behind them. We had people absolutely everywhere, and the morgue was overflowing. They no longer had anywhere to put the bodies. We had to open up the Halles de Rungis to stock the bodies there. That was absolutely appalling.
The scale of the deaths caused a huge national crisis in France. The government blamed the emergency system for being slow to react. The emergency services blamed the government for complacency. And the president blamed the citizens for abandoning their elderly relatives. The media savaged the whole political establishment. Eventually, the Surgeon General was forced to resign, and the Minister of Health was later dropped from the cabinet.
Heat is a very important determinant of work productivity. In India, for example, we are an agrarian nation and most of our population is working outdoors. In hot conditions, the only way the body can manage the temperature is by sweating. We have millions of people working outdoors. So in the context of climate change, these are only going to worsen. Drought is already fairly common in many developing countries. The main challenges in the context of drought is water scarcity, and because of water scarcity, families might use sources of water which are not safe, and this might increase diarrheal diseases by a great number.
Traditionally rain every April and March in some places. Every August we get rain. Every December we get short rains, but nowadays there is not that formula. You will only manage to get showers possibly 2 years. After 2 years, showers, not rain. This lake water to us means everything. There's no fish nowadays, let me tell you. The fish need deep water, so that's where we go and get fish. Rain drops somewhere, all of them go there, and others, they don't want others to come to their side. So they kill each other because of grass and water.
Aria kasko tuloko achakaring pute kaya nanam. Tonya urabo emambo reyeni. Zani olosi kumbe darte tani kama. Kabela nyoromo na tene pute akitengwa naka. Kumbe yetani lokamate. Pup tar robaje. Kon roba kituke ni aria jile akoro. Ngire torto ken ngedana.
Kadema to kona ibarenge are ngibaren. Ibarenge are. Ni yene atomarikane de yene adodi akiru. Akiru. Roba kita yara itunguna ni pe ni dongit au mer ngutunga lukwala au mer anan ane mama ruto kizikolo ngwali aruto kola ana mitene ani kolo ngaye.
In the case of the lake, I blame the European government for blocking the Homer River. For the rain, possibly we will blame the Western world, because I think the impact of their factories which have contributed to the climate change. They want to say, it will never end like a lake. That is what our people usually say. Yani, when you want to say this thing cannot finish, it's just like Lake Turkana. But the way the lake is moving, I think that idiom will lose meaning.
Droughts and heat waves increase the risk of wildfires. In many parts of the world, wildfires are burning across huge tracts of land. Wildfire smoke contains about 10,000 chemicals. That smoke can travel over large distances, affect people for many days and many months, primarily by irritating airways.
Forget it. It's time to go. Forget it, bro. It's time to leave.
Yeah.
It's too hot, it's too smoky, get out, man.
Yeah. I'm not sure where the front is now, but we're trying to make sure that everyone's safe in Winmalee.
Over the last couple of weeks, it's been extremely hot in Sydney for this time of the year, and that creates the right ingredients for catastrophic bushfires.
New South Wales has suffered the worst bushfire disaster in a decade.
House after house burning out of control. House after house destroyed.
My house is fine. My kids are in at the school and we don't know, no one can seem to tell us where they are. There's belief that they're at Winmalee Shopping Centre, but no one can tell me.
Not there.
There's no roll call. I need to know and no one's giving me answers.
Within the emergency services, I think that people are acutely aware that something quite significant is happening. The frequency and the magnitude of the extreme weather events has increased dramatically.
Australia's just come through the hottest 12-month period that it's ever had on record. The most striking feature of that was the angry summer, the 3-month period from December 2012 through February 2013. It was remarkable for the number of extreme weather-related records that were set.
You only need to talk to firefighters and they'll all tell you that things are very different for them than they were 10 years ago.
We are warming the climate, heating the atmosphere, heating the ocean.
Climate is already a very important determinant of the distribution of infectious diseases. For example, mosquitoes are primarily found in tropical countries because they prefer warmer and more humid climate.
Kenya has made progress in fighting malaria. The last epidemic happened a decade ago. There are still 1,000 new cases of malaria each month, but the disease is usually treatable. However, climate change is exacerbating the problem. Malaria is spreading to Kenya's highlands. Here, health workers offer advice and preventative drugs. Even at elevations of more than 2,000 meters, the nights have grown warm enough for mosquitoes to breed freely. Mosquito nets have become a must. Weather stations are being set up, and meteorologists are using modern technology to predict whether or not mosquitoes will be likely to multiply. Solomon Nzioka from the World Health Organization explains how it works.
What we are trying to come up is a mathematical formula which can take care of all these variations, including if there was mass intervention. There is a factor that will be factored in and still be able to say how much of malaria still is expected.
Air pollution is linked to climate change in many ways. More recently, air pollution is being recognized as a very important public health problem. Burning of fossil fuels causes air pollution, and burning of fossil fuels is also the primary driver of climate change. Increased air pollution leads to a range of diseases. For example, cardiovascular diseases such as stroke and heart attacks, and respiratory diseases such as asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So burning of fossil fuels is not just about driving cars and flying in airplanes. Most of our electricity is produced by burning coal, and this is also a very important contributor to air pollution. Development, health and well-being are dependent on access to energy. So energy is very important, but the way we are producing energy is having huge costs on health. So almost 90% of air pollution related deaths occur in low and middle income countries.
What happens if the glaciers that provide water to about 1 billion people melt? What happens if food production goes down? What happens in urban settlements where people are very precariously housed, don't have access to food and water? What happens to their lives in a changing climate? More than half of the world's population lives within 60 kilometers of the coastline. People may be forced to move, and that in turn heightens a range of other health effects based on displacement or communicable disease.
About 5 years ago, the sea started coming into the room. So we were compelled to leave the place, abandon the place, and find somewhere else. It's a bedroom to my wife. This is my own room.
I've lost my land. Everything depends on land. I've lost my land. I've lost relations who are displaced. Young men and women who should work here and make their life have all gone away.
We're experiencing erosion as much as between 4 and 8 meters per year. We used to have structures along the entire coast of our dam. Majority of these structures are now under the ocean. So erosion is massive. Now, global warming as a result of climate change is the main cause of the sea level rise we are experiencing.
আগে আসলে আমার থেকে আমার সব চলে গেছে সাগরে এখন মানে বেরিবাজার উপরে আই ওই দুধদাঙ্গা করি মাছ টাছ ধরিয়া খাওয়া দাওয়া করি
সমুদ্র মানে আর ছোটটা যেভাবে দেখি এভাবে 91 ঘর জিয়ান যারা এখন দূর মারা এড়ে ওর কুটুর দিয়া ধরে ফেলি তো মানে আগত তো একটু বাড়া এখন শুরু হবে দেখতুন আর ইহঁত তো শুরু হবে আর তো বাচ্চা ছেলে যাতে আছে
সাইজটা হচ্ছে যে এটা স্থানীয় জানা যায় এক সময় এটা 54 স্কয়ার কিলোমিটার ছিল বিভিন্ন তথ্য দেখে এটা এখন মাত্র 27 বর্গ কিলোমিটার প্রতিনিয়ত মাইগ্রেশন হচ্ছে
কুতুবদিয়া থেকে এসেছে এই বাস্তুচ্যুত হয়ে শুধু নদী জলবায়ু পরিবর্তনজনিত কারণে সাগরের ভাঙ্গনের কবলে পড়ে যাদের অনেক সহায় সম্পদ ছিল এখন তাদের সহায় সম্পদ বলতে কিছু নাই কুতুবদিয়া থেকে অনেক লোক বাস্তুবিটা হারিয়ে এই কক্সবাজার জেলার মধ্যে অনেক উপজেলায় প্রায় লক্ষাধিক মানুষ এখন উদ্বাস্তু হয়ে বিভিন্নভাবে তারা বসবাস করছে
টাকা পয়সা যায় তো সাগর ওকুলে ওদিক চলাফেরা বাসাবাস করতাম
Malnutrition is already a very huge problem, especially in developing countries, where many areas have over 50% children who are malnourished and stunted. High temperatures and variable rainfall can reduce food production.
The World Health Organization estimates an additional 500,000 adult deaths by 2050.
But we're also starting to see the early evidence of the impacts of climate change on things like agricultural yields or water security. And the concerns that we have is that over time, those impacts are only going to get worse. It's only going to lead to more water insecurity, to greater problems for agricultural yields and so on.
Climate change is completely altering how food supply chains work.
It's going to be the fundamental effects on food yields, on fresh water flows, things that are the life support system.
La tierra está seca, que no hay humedad para la planta, porque hubo poca lluvia.
Siempre nosotros hemos vivido del campo, siempre nos hemos mantenido de lo que cosechamos, de ahí sacamos para comprar los demás alimentos.
Antes yo cosechaba 3, 4, 5, 6 toneladas de maíz y frijol, y ahora como ya nada, no llueve.
Por toda la sequía que se nos ha venido de años con año, ya tenemos bastantes años. Desgraciadamente, así estamos.
Cuando no hay cosecha, pues tenemos que salir fuera a buscar la manera de cómo vivir. Por ejemplo, aquí en nuestra comunidad, ahorita vemos un monto de 1,600 habitantes. Estamos hablando ya de unos 2 años y medio para atrás, habíamos como unos 4,800 habitantes y toda esa gente nos está yendo de aquí.
Por cuestión de lo que dicen los científicos, de que hay un cambio, que hay todo, pues no hay necesidad de que lo veamos allá de los científicos, que nos digan. Lo estamos viendo personalmente aquí, que no nos llueve.
Pues yo al ver mío, yo lo miro que al paso de que vamos, yo creo que vamos a llegar a un pueblo fantasma.
Poverty is a key determinant of health, affecting infectious diseases, chronic diseases, and also access to health systems. Climate change can increase poverty through many mechanisms, such as it affects livelihoods, it forces migration, and also increases healthcare costs.
Living at the margin of society and being highly exposed, like living in a floodplain or being homeless, makes people vulnerable to climate change, not a flood or a drought or heat stress per se. So it's about these inequalities that exist in every society, both in the North and the South, that make people vulnerable. And often they're associated to gender, to age, well-being, health, class, race, ethnicity. and whether or not people have access to resources and a stake in decision-making processes.
The real concern for us, the bottom line of that, is the impacts on human health, and particularly the most vulnerable populations in the world that are already struggling with climate-sensitive infectious diseases or food insecurity or water insecurity.
Where we have health inequalities already, pre-existing conditions will be exacerbated by climate change. We stand to lose globally some of the progress that we have made on health inequalities because of climate change.
Policy failure on climate change is going to put enormous pressure on both the military and the health communities, because in effect they'll be our first responders to the consequences of failing to address climate change. Anybody who thinks that a world that's 2 or 4 degrees hotter will be healthy or secure is kidding themselves. They haven't actually understood what climate change means.
The biggest indirect effect of climate change on health is social change, which includes migration and conflict.
Well, we in the military organization operate across the whole of the world. We need to understand the environment in which we're going to be operating, and we need to understand the political, environmental and other stresses that might actually precipitate conflict in the future.
It's not that climate change in itself is likely to start a conflict, but the impact of the second and third order consequences. When people lose their land, their livelihood, what do they do? Do they migrate? Do they migrate within a country, between countries? Is it organized, or is it chaos? Does it cause tension? Or if they have no livelihood, do they find something which is legal, or are they vulnerable to recruiting into organised crime or even terrorism?
So soldiers and the Ministry of Defence, those sorts of people who begin to talk more openly about the threat that climate change poses to security and the wars that are already happening around the world, the conflicts that will happen due to water shortage, fuel shortage, food, land shortages, displaced people, refugees, those sort of issues that are increasingly already with us and are going to become a much greater problem over the next 10, 15 years.
There's a band that runs around the world, centred on the equator, where there's already problems with health, food shortages, water shortages, demographic challenges, and we've seen conflict there in the past. Conflict is partly due to the result of the governments in those countries not necessarily having the capacity and resilience to deal with it. Climate change is going to have its greatest effect. It's also where the world's trade routes run. We're a globalised society. We're all dependent on trade of some form or other, imports, exports, and in particular for us in Europe, energy, but also food and other goods coming from the Middle East and further afield. Same for China, 75% of their oil goes through the Malacca Straits. So we've got a global problem which is potentially going to affect global stability.
And so when you add those things up of disease, economic collapse, plague, pestilence, famine, starvation, you end up with mass migration. And if you get mass migration into resource-poor areas, you get conflicts and you get wars. And I come back to the fact that health has always been driven worldwide by poverty and war. And in the end, that's what's going to be the most rapid ramping up, I think, and impacts on health in the coming few years.
If there are food shortages or resource shortages, those powerful nations that have military might will, in the end, when pushed, defend the interests of their societies using whatever means at their disposal.
Many of the areas of the world which are suffering from serious health problems, serious security problems, serious climate change problems are the same.
All of us are at risk because we live in such a tightly connected world.
For too long, I think climate change has been framed as an issue that affects economies or affects polar bears.
The military security part is a key piece of the jigsaw.
So climate change affects health on many levels and in many ways. There are direct effects, there are indirect effects, there are short-term effects, and there are long-term effects. The most important thing is that we don't know a lot of what the health effects will be. So it's very important for health professionals to stay educated, be aware of what's happening, and think about the possible knock-on effects related to weather, related to food, related to migration, and related to conflict.